Now, in my household, February is a big month. We have now, I don't want y'all two to change how you do the podcast, but Kim, my wife, listens to the episodes. She listens to the introduction and then it gets to the nerd shit and she's out. Right. So, like,
Smart.
yes, indeed. That's pretty much how I do every episode. Uh, and and so February is a big month. We got my wife's birthday. We've got Cormac's birthday, my son. But the biggest holiday of the whole year we have is Valentine's Day. Right now, Valentine's Day is when you express, you show your love for the people that you love in your life. Now, your lady friend, your special lady friend, all sorts of things, your wife, whatever it may be, all of those people. And then what Kim introduced me to with Valentine's Day is that it's not only for your, as they say, love, it's also for the people that you just love in your life, your kids. So you'll give them some stuff. You might even have them wake up in the morning and come out and see some sort of, full spread of presents on the table. I was thinking Valentine's Day is coming up, right? I've got to think about what to get for my lovely wife. But then it occurred to me, what should I be getting? What should I say is like because we're this is the one time that the stereotypical, like, a bunch of in their 30s, now 40s, white guys talking to each other on a podcast stereotype is really going to pay off, because who the fuck knows what to get us for Valentine's Day,
Oof.
right? And so I wanted to, as I always like to do here, let's do a little round table, and I might have to skip, but, like, really help out people to say, like, what do you want on Valentine's Day? Valentine's Day is not your birthday. It's not Christmas. Definitely not Thanksgiving. It's this whole other thing where you're going to get a gift. But what are you looking for? And you can't be like me, where I would be like, I don't really want anything, right? Like, what is it that you're really looking for on Valentine's Day?
Well, I definitely would go with, like, I don't not want anything. But if I was forced to give an answer, I don't generally want anything, like, if you will, material that's just going to be another thing in the house. So I'd probably be like, I don't know, like some candy, like a sweet treat, something kind of like,
Okay.
kind of just
A
like
consumable.
something consumable that's kind of like fun for something, something along those lines. Because I just don't generally want more stuff of any kind, unless it's like something
Right.
and I admit I'm very particular about the things that I want. So it's like, you can't really just like, oh, I got you this. It's like, no, I've
This
been
is the
researching
problem,
this for a while.
right?
And
Yes.
I don't want that. That's not you got the wrong color version, whatever. So I tried to do that. So if I had to do it, it'd be something along those lines. But I would say, maybe wrongly, I wouldn't say I take Valentine's as serious as it sounds as you do. So I wouldn't say, like, I don't think it's as important a holiday as you kind of threw it out there. But again, that would maybe be a minority opinion. Matt, what are your thoughts?
Bringing a little bit of American values to the Netherlands. Did they even do like Valentine's Day?
This is a good
Because like
question.
here,
And
the pushback was like, that's an American thing, just like Halloween. But you know what?
Well-
Halloween's bigger than it was when I moved here. So
Now,
you see it happening.
one of the primary reasons that I like computers is they tell me things, like the date that Valentine's Day is. I'm not quite sure when it is, but I can look it up and find out. But perhaps maybe the week before that episode, we should bring this question back up, and I'll see if there's stuff around. But I think in the Netherlands, it's kind of like Halloween. Like, it may not be like a big deal like it is in the States, but I think Valentine's Day, it's landed here. Like,
I mean,
they do
because
it.
in the U.S. there are going to be a bunch of articles about how much money is being generated by the holiday. Like that is a very American thing. They're like, oh, consumers spend $40 billion on cards and candy and flowers, right? I mean, I was reading an article about the fight between Trump and Colombia, and they pointed out that Valentine's Day was coming and Colombia exports flowers, and I was like, seriously,
yes.
I mean, it's that kind of thinking just infects a lot of everything.
Yeah.
in the US.
Now, this is a total side note that I'm going to bring us back from, but I think
Thank you.
you're
Walk me off the ledge fast.
There's an idea in my head that you're formulating that maybe some of our people who are familiar with Dutch culture can, like, validate. But I think the Dutch don't have that notion that we have in America of like, it's just a scam to make money. I mean, it kind of comes up. I think the Dutch are fine if you have a scam to make money. But what they're more interested in is like, you know, can I like stop working at 4:30 and go get a beer?
That's what I'm saying. You know what I
Like,
want for Valentine's Day? A day off.
right. And so I think
Can you talk to my boss?
so here in the Netherlands, the spirit would be like, I mean, sure, it's like a thing that I got to do, and like it might be businesses making money, but am I enjoying it? Right?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
like I think in Europe they may not think in these terms because this is a very American way of putting it, but I think in Europe they enjoy paying for something if they get something.
Oh, sure,
Right? Like,
sure. No, I'm not down on it completely. I'm just saying like the amount of consumerism that the US pushes on things
this is
gets
true.
the pushback,
So,
right? So
It does get to be a little bonkers, right?
you know, you must buy flowers, you must get cards. Yeah.
To add the other side to what I was saying, there is not the amount of commercialization of stuff anywhere in Europe I have ever encountered that there is in America. So maybe they just haven't experienced the like the upchuck inducing amount of that you
Because
can have.
maybe this goes back to your original question here, is that saying it's like, I would just reading between the lines on the way you pose it would be like, seems like Valentine's Day is very important to your significant other. There, it's important. Therefore, you should make the extra effort to make it good for that situation. But maybe what it is that you should be thinking about is not so much like you actually don't want anything for Valentine's Day, but there's something else in your life or whatever, your broader, you know, whatever that you do want. And it's sort of like just acknowledging that, like, hey, I don't really want anything for this, but I want this other thing is important to me, which may not be important to you. So maybe that's
true.
like,
True.
I want some dedicated time to play Dungeons and Dragons with ChatGPT for a long, whatever, you know, I'm just throwing that out there as a ridiculous
You want to
example.
get a new
but
drone.
that's sort of like, you know what I'm saying? It's sort of acknowledging, you know, that you can have different, you can have different desires, and that's okay too. Right.
Now, first of all, Brandon, for CY 2025, my therapist raised his rates $10 an hour more. I want to make sure that if you've raised your rates, I want to Venmo you the right amount of money, so you can have to email me afterwards.
That's right, of course.
But I think that is all part of it, right? Is how do you because this is the other confounding thing is I think that there is a set of people who do not value the gift. Let me rephrase that. There's a certain set of people who do not value the gift of giving of just money. And what I'm trying to say there is they do not, I think we've mentioned this several times over the years, the people who don't want to give gift certificates as a gift, right? And they think that like maybe this is not the correct thing to do. So, you know, maybe what they will value is time, as you're saying, right? The old coupon book that you used to do in your 20s, where you'd write a bunch of coupons and say you could give time for things. And I think that is perhaps what we're looking for here. Not sort of like, you know, the exact amount of money that you pay for things or things like that, but the value that you have, which I think, you know, that really brings up maybe the biggest news item for the past week, which is if the amount of money that you pay for AI computation drastically goes down, maybe we should focus on the value, the way that it improves our lives.
Nice.
And, you know, like things like that. So, you know, I obviously, if listeners know where I work and have been watching the stock, I have paid very close attention to what's happened in the past week. But how about you two? How's it panning out for you? This discovery that maybe, what is it, $5 million? You can, I'm exaggerating here, but apparently you can train a model that will bring the paperclip apocalypse upon us humans. It doesn't cost $500 billion. How's it panning out in your worlds?
Well, I think you're referring to, of course, the DeepSeek, just to get everyone up to date. So DeepSeek, you know, launched their new model, which they, you know, pretty much credibly have said they built for a lot less than that it took to, if you will, build frontier models. So that's, of course, led to a pretty big sell-off, at least while we're recording this, in some of the stocks related to AI. And hence, Matt, I know you have some thoughts on this. Since you're a resident trader, tell us what you proceeded to do this week.
I evacuated my position on Nvidia. I decided it was time to take my winnings and go home for the night. So yeah, we've talked about it on the show before. When my couple companies ago got sold, I took the money and put it in the stock market right before COVID. And when COVID hit, I was like, what are people going to want? And I was like, video games. So I bought AMD and Nvidia and some other.
So if we just jump in here, so we would call that good process, but kind of wrong outcome. Like you went in,
Exactly.
like you went in with a very solid premise, and that premise had nothing to do with the reason you made money.
It was still up like 70% before ChatGPT.
Hey, man,
right? I mean, it was still killing it.
Just take the win. I agree. I like it, Doug. Take the win. I love it. But you did this week shook you though. So you got out. Huh?
Well, I've been eyeing it for a long time and thinking, if this thing dropped, because it started as like a small percentage of my portfolio, and I mentioned to my wife the other day, I was like, this thing's up to 40%. It started at like 7 or 8. Mm-hmm. And so I sold it off, and the final return was over 550%. So that's pretty good for 5 times not 4 or 5 years. Yeah. So I figured it was time.
Well, I was just thinking, before we get into the news, I actually was thinking, I've heard so much analysis on this. I threw up some rules I think we should just throw out. So like when we experience this, how should we process it? So I just throw out some of them, and you can kind of give me your reaction to some of them. So the first thing I always put at the top of my list is nobody knows anything yet. And everyone has an agenda, including us. So I think it's sort of like, as you're like listening to all the coverage, you should always remember that. Like, really, nobody knows anything. So that's number one. Yeah. 2 was everyone that had a vested interest before, whether it was for expensive or cheap frontier models, will likely maintain that position regardless of what the actual truth is. So if you already spent billions of dollars on a frontier model, you're going to defend that. You're going to be like, of course we had to do that. And if you haven't spent money on a frontier model, you're going to be like, of course we didn't. And I think, because it's very hard to get off your position. And I think all of us would feel this way. Like, you're not going to just come out and be like, you know what? OpenAI is not going to be like, turns out, guys, all of this money that we spent completely wasted.
Can we give you back that last round, please?
Right. It won't. It's not going to happen. Right. So I think that's something we should all keep in. So it's just like, you just know who you're like listening, like where it's coming from. Right.
Well, and I think this plays well with my equivocating position when we had a predictions episode where I was like, eventually things are going to catch up with this. I'm not sure when, but it's going to happen. Until then, I'm going to hold on to my Nvidia.
Absolutely. That was good. So
that was my prediction. And now I'm like, I'm feeling like I don't want to hold on.
You're feeling a little worried there. So I get it. So again, we don't know anything. Kind of like, let's apply rule number 1 to us. Like, Matt doesn't really know anything. He bought it for video games, made 5 times his money, and he's selling it now. He doesn't actually know anything. So maybe you should do what Matt did. Maybe you shouldn't, but he doesn't really know anything. Take the win. Right? So the other one I was going to say here, it's like on DeepSeek, the foundation model in general, it's like there's at least speculation. Like, they definitely did it cheaply. No, it turns out they had the secret pile of chips, and we don't know. So it's going to take a little bit for someone to actually chips. Right. But it's going to take a while for someone to really validate exactly what they did and is it cheaper. Probably a couple of researchers. Everyone's really working on it probably right now, but I think you got to give it at least a few weeks, a month, to be like, a few people come out and say, like, it's almost like a peer-reviewed study. Like, we've had a bunch of people do it. They all agree that it can be done in a way that was described in their own paper.
People are picking at the details, but nobody said like, this is BS. Everyone's
I agree.
Like, they did some innovative things. They super optimizations.
I go back to number 1 again. Number 1, no one knows anything. So number 2, I think you're right. Indications are very clear that, like, it looks what they're saying is true, but just wait. I think it's worth waiting a little bit. See some people actually do it. And then, of course, the other one is like, let's assume that they are right and they were able to do it for significantly less costs. Everybody involved, this entire industry, no matter what they were doing, are all going to claim victory and simultaneously all refer to, I don't know if it's Jevons paradox, right?
Yeah.
Whatever it is, like, that will be cited 450 billion times about why what they were doing. In fact, the fact that it's now free makes them in a better position. Everyone will say that. No one will be like, whoa, like this is horrible. Like Jensen Huang's not gonna come out and be like, whoa, nobody really needs these shifts anymore. We're screwed. It's gonna be like, no, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened. So I think we can predict that, right? I think the other thing is like, assume it's right. It's like, I think we kind of all win, right? Because we all, the regular people win, because if AI is really going to be helpful for all of us, then I think we're all just going to get access to it better. So,
I actually think there are a couple of losers.
Could be. But are you thinking losers as far as company, or losers as far as like the end user? I just think the end user.
No.
People,
I think
this
is
are good.
Good for the end users. I think.
Yeah, that's kind of what I meant there. Like good for the general. Like if you're not a VC or an investor, just a regular person.
Those are the people who are going to be hating this.
Sure. And then the last one. This is more one I wrote for myself. Is sort of like, don't miss out on the benefits of AI due to cynicism, but at the same time, be very skeptical of the bold claims. So you have to think, we all have to like do that. Like I did a little personal project, Cursor, fantastic. I've touched it. I played with it. I love it. I can see why software development is revolutionized. Some of the other stuff, like, I don't know. Some of the very bold claims about AGI, I'm just like, I don't know. And I think the final one here is just like, you should try to use it yourself. So use some type of Gen AI yourself, and then you can decide if it was helpful or it was a waste of time. So there you go. Those are my meta commentary points about how to evaluate it. Coach, what are your thoughts?
I love it. We need to etch it on stone. I think it makes sense. I want to add just one more to it, which is like, you always think you're some sort of 1%er smart person, like you're off there with Galt and all those people. But you know what? You're just going to get fucked like everyone else. Like your time is going to come, right? And so like, don't think that your own almost like worth or intellectual prowess, like that you're not susceptible to all these things like everyone else is, right? We're all just in one big bucket. And it's better that like help each other out than like think that like, oh, we're going to establish our Kevin Costner like ocean world thing where we are not bound by these rules and things like that. Because I mean, what it shows is that like all of the kind of hubris that comes with we're a bunch of smart people and we're reinventing everything. Like it can be like destroyed in basically like a 24-hour period by what you may consider to be like weird normies and things like that. But it's very like, maybe if you just weren't so like thinking you were like doing great things and like a genius, you'd be a little bit better. Maybe that's a little ranty there, but it does seem like there's all the kind of verifications also that you need to go through for it. But I think we hit upon some things at the end there, is that the Jevons paradox thing is beneficial for individuals out there, right? Like it's not always beneficial for the people who are holding scarce resources or things that are expensive, versus like if once something becomes cheaper for everyone, right, then it's great. Now, I think there's a lot of assumptions to kind of use my own advice there. It has only been, you can go listen to the Ben Thompson thing and see that they talked about this back in November or something like that. And it's only taken till now and all the explanations of why that's happened. But you still need to verify like all the different ways that this model was done and how much money went into doing it and blah, blah, blah. So who knows actually how cheap things are, but probably the end result is that as we experience with all technology, it gets cheaper as the years go by. So you should kind of plan on that and, I don't know, figure out a way to benefit from it. And I don't know, like it's been a crazy couple of weeks as well. Like we had like a whole bit new presidential thing and then this AI thing. And I was just thinking earlier today, it's only Wednesday. It feels like it's Thursday already.
Well, I did think one of the quotes I took out of many newsletters that covered this was about venture capital. So I'll just quickly read it here. It says, quote, "This could be an extinction level event for venture capital firms that went all in on foundational model companies, particularly if those companies haven't yet produced with the wide distribution." So anyway, long way of saying. So I was like, what do you do? Like, it is kind of one of those things I thought, like, maybe it's for Matt, you know, the resident investor here. It's like, if you did, like, if you were like the person that was like raised, you know, whatever, billions of dollars, and you gave it to someone to build a foundation model, like it's going to be tough. It feels like it's going to be a difficult moment in your investor relations, what they call it, your limited partner update. Like, that feels like a tough place to be right now.
Well, I mean, if this was the event that set you off, you had already missed the boat, right? I mean, there was already like trouble ahead. Everybody saw, you know, the semi-open source stuff from Facebook was upsetting things. There were too many models. The pace of model advancement had slowed while getting more expensive. There was already a lot of trouble ahead in this space. And then somebody shows up and they're like, we do it for 100th the price. And so all that like sunken capital into building new models is now just like, it's burned. So if you're VC, you know, if you're not tied to like one of the, you know, 2 or 3 leaders, you know, if you're not Google or Microsoft or Amazon, and you're not Anthropic or OpenAI, you probably need to get out.
now, based on what you two were saying, maybe this is another view, is that if we look at the amount of money that was spent on the Manhattan Project by the government, right? And then you think, like, the Manhattan Projects, like probably drove trillions of dollars in commercial interest and things like that. And then you look at all the money that Al Gore spent on building the internet, right? Like, that was a lot of government and nonprofit money. And so what happened, you know, you had, you know, like after Reagan and Thatcher and all that kind of stuff, and even Clinton, like, you kind of deregulated and you pushed sort of the advancement of civilization into the private sector. And what you're saying is, so now you're in charge of all of that. You have to fund it, right? Like, you've got to spend the money on it. And then you see that with like, you know, Elon Musk's company, like sending rockets around. Instead of funding it through the government, you're going to do it in a private way. So if we take AI as an example there, and in the scenario where we trust all the DeepSeek stuff, that it's all legit and whatever, like, so we did spend all these billions and billions of dollars to get to the point where someone could come do what do they call it? Not a derivative, but a distillation of a model on that.
Right.
Then it's sort of like, well, yes, that's how innovation happens. Innovation is like but like it's the bad end of Moore's law, where like it cost a shit ton of money that even Zeus would blanch at to spend to get to the point where it costs nothing. And normally you would have us, the people, the taxpayers, pay for it, and you not amortize. You spread that out over all the different people. It's not that much of a big deal. But if you center it on just a couple of like sovereign wealth funds and some people out in California, like, it's shocking, right? But really, that's the game they're signing up for. Is you've got to burn through this money to get through an advancement of how things are happening.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, people who profess to love capitalism should hate monopolies, because, you know, monopolies protect their pricing and suck up all the outcomes with none of the risk. Whereas, like, what you just described is what people who say they're capitalist libertarian thinkers say they want, but really they rarely actually go for. So, you know, they try to lock things up with, you know, legislation and the like to, you know, protect what they've done, which is why with this AI stuff, you're going to see like, oh, we can't trust it because it's Chinese, or, you know, we can't trust it because it's open source. So it's like,
right.
You know, you've kind of lost that.
I can't help but think, like, some of this, you know, because we've covered a long running theme on Software Defined Talk, right? It's us covering sort of like an open source project getting some momentum, and then, like, you know, being co-opted by a larger company. And of course that creates a lot of frustration amongst the original open source people, and, you know, many license changes derive from that, right? We've covered that plenty of times, but like, I do think it's kind of ironic or interesting here. It's like, this seems to be the reverse, right? It's sort of like the largest companies in the world did go out and spend all this money on a frontier model, which seemed like it was important to us, right? And to your point, Cote, we can call that capitalism at work. But then what happened was, that model basically was then used to create a cheap model. And now, if you will, it's kind of going the other way. The people that spent all this money, instead of being co-opted, the one co-opting something that was free and making it proprietary is the other way around. It's like, well, we're just using your proprietary thing to build a free thing, and now everyone's going to have it, which is sort of like, I guess in some ways it is sort of like capitalism at work. And then of course, now we're starting to see, I think his name is Dario, he wrote a really long post on Anthropic. Not surprising, like go back to our rules, not surprising. He's built a very large foundation model. He believes there's still a need, and it was very smart to build foundation models. That's the net of his post. But he's kind of going into saying it's like, well, we need export controls, and this has really worked well. And it's like, it's just one of these things where you're just sort of like, well, it's just kind of backwards now, right? This is sort of like, well, the everyman, if you will, every person rather is getting access to it. And now it's just like, it's the arguments in reverse, right? It's like, wait a minute. All of you can't do it. And I don't know how much it's come out, but like some of the LLMs are now, they're saying like, well, they used our LLM to build their LLM, right? That's not fair. And then of course you have like all of the internet and all of journalism saying, wait a minute, you used our text to build the LLM. So it's just like everybody's just constantly like pointing at the person that was behind them. Like you're doing it wrong, which is, I think is just, if you will, it's the classic American capitalism kind of funny thing happening. So I don't know.
Yeah.
Cote, thoughts?
Well, what I want to hear from you, Brandon, is you read this whole book about the Nvidia Way, right? So I think of the three of us, you've got a sense of what's going on in alligator leather jacket land over there, or whatever it is. I think someone did some research. Maybe it's actually not. We should find the article, but someone actually did some close analysis of what that jacket is.
Did they find the exact jacket so I can dress like him?
I think they did. And so knowing Nvidia like you do now, Brandon, after reading that book, what do you think's going on over there? Like what are they cycling through?
Well, I almost feel like Cote and Matt. I feel like I kind of wrote off. I did read this a while ago. We had it in the notes. It just hasn't really been relevant. But I feel like, oh man, I really should have published this beforehand. I wanted to get my comments on record because I feel like it's already happened. But I thought, like, overall the book, I gave the book 3 out of 5 stars. And I think my biggest thing that I kind of said in kind of my own notes to myself was that, I thought the book was going to be a time capsule in general. This is kind of like Matt's investing thing. I just sometimes like to read these things right at because it kind of often serves as like the apex moment. You're like, when the book comes out from the leader of the biggest company, you're like, that could be the apex, right? That's almost like if we're using some trading stuff, it's like, maybe it's time to Matt's point, maybe it's time to sell Nvidia, because it's sort of like usually the book comes out and then everything goes bad, right?
Now, I want to pause you there. I want to pause you there because I'm really liking this theory, right? And this theory is historically testable.
Oh,
yeah, for sure.
Like you could totally go and look. You could identify.
Like Built to Last, Good to Great are books that are just fantastic to historically look at. They've just here's incredibly wrong. Go on.
I think the model you could do is identify when the top New York Times best-selling book of a company came out and chart that against their share price and just see what happens. So
I
like this.
I like it. So yeah.
This is I'm going to call this the Witchard Airport Business Book Hypothesis.
It is. I mean, it's kind of a version of books that kill, that podcast that does a good job, but it's like a tech business book version of that. So, and so the thing that comes across in the book is, I always like to say and the reason I kind of think it's interesting to read these things is I kind of believe, and this is not a new thing, it's not my idea, but it's sort of like, I would just call it markets over management, right? All of these books essentially come down to like one of two questions. Like, did the company just pick the right market, or was it the management of the company that ultimately, if he was successful? And I would say most of the time, it's really picking the right market, either by accident or by some rigorous analysis. But once you're in the right market, you can kind of just do everything wrong and you'll still work out, right? And again, a very popular opinion. And I think, in this book, right, but the thing that's fun to write about are all like the weird things that are unique to a company. So in this book, they really talk about that. Jensen has like 40 direct reports. I have a friend that works at Nvidia said now it's up to 60, right? Because that's really unusual. So people like to talk about it, right? They talk about how Jensen gives very direct public feedback. That's the only way he gives, if you will, feedback to you, which I would say is not generally how human beings like to receive, let's call it constructive criticism, right? But that's the only way he does it. And the other thing that's kind of like talked about in this book over and over is that they like to use whiteboards. They just keep talking about how Jensen talks at a whiteboard and he expresses his ideas at a whiteboard, and whiteboarding super important, and whiteboarding is the way you think through your ideas, and on and on and on. Which reminded me a lot of like the 6-page memo, in the sense of like, wow, this is like a really contrast, right? The 6-page memo is all about like writing and having it read and everyone just reading it, right? And I just like to like kind of like put these things out. It's like, oh, these things are just correlations, right? It's just more about these companies, Amazon and Nvidia, were in the right markets. But then this week, I thought that was really interesting because they make a ton of points in the book that everyone at Nvidia works very long hours. 100%. If you read the book, it should come as no surprise that like basically 10, 12 hours a day, probably most of Saturday, or at least half a day on Saturday. And then they go through that, like Jensen Huang, one of the things you do, everyone, if you will, sends a top 5 email. And the top 5 emails are then, if you will, rolled up, and then Jensen gets them all, right?
With AI.
And he gets them all. And then I guess he goes through, and I think he sets a time to read for like 100 a day, right? And so again, they talk about like this is his way to like stay in tune, know what's going on, kind of skip level meetings, get information directly from people. And so I just thought it was interesting this week. It's like, to your original question on this, Cote, it's like, I would love to know. It's like, all right, they work all these hours, they do all these top 5 emails, there's all this direct feedback and all of this whiteboarding. But, at some point this week, they lost $500 billion. So it's like, kind of like, what went wrong here? Like, if somebody, like, it's kind of like, to me, it calls into question all these things. Like, you're doing all of this stuff and you're generating a lot of time and effort on these things, right? And you still, like, I don't know. I haven't seen any statement from NVIDIA. I assume at some point they'll say something. Probably makes sense for them to say nothing at the moment. But it's like, did they just miss this? And maybe they did. And like, was it even realistic? Should we even hold them accountable to try to see these things? Because again, in the book, they talk about customer obsession, knowing what their customers are doing. They give all these examples of like the scientists were using this, and that's how they kind of saw that they needed CUDA, and they saw the need for AI was coming. And it's like, well, like, I mean, again, like back in the spirit of like public discourse or public feedback, well, like, how did NVIDIA miss this completely? Like, did nobody know what was going on at DeepSeek? Did no one call? And again, it's like, and if you didn't know what was going on, like, is that on you? I mean, certainly the book would make it feel like the management structure, right, was in control of all these things. So if you were to apply that, it would be like, it seems like a really big miss by them, but maybe I'm overstating it. What do you think, Cote?
Well, regardless of if the DeepSeek thing is like were to happen, or if it actually is a real thing or not, like, I think what you described sounds like a terrible place to work and a way of existing.
I mean, what I wanted to bring up was like, for all their success, you haven't seen the business books that are like the Nvidia Way, right? Well, that are encouraging people to like follow up on this and bring it into their own companies. Like, nobody's like, this is a good idea, you should do it too.
And like, what got me thinking on this is, well, I mean, obviously having 60 reports or 40 reports is,
I think having more than 10 is ridiculous.
Like we there's an upcoming episode of Software Defined Interviews, which you can subscribe to by searching for Software Defined Interviews, where we talk with Richard Seroter. And one of the things about him, the chief evangelist at Google Cloud, and I kind of sort of work for him up the management chain, is everyone who has worked for him says that he is great at career management, right? And so I have to think that if you have 40 or 60 people working for you, when do you have time to give them like an hour a month of coaching for their career?
Well, they don't. I mean, basically,
right?
They don't do that, right?
Like, when are you going to help them out? When are you going to try to like do anything other than just like, where's my fucking whiteboard, right? And so one, there's that where you can burn a candle out, but when it's done, there's no candle, right? Like, you've got to figure out like how to like keep the candle going and how to refuel it and like have the sustainability of the organization, right? And I haven't studied this, but like you listen to Ben Thompson's tale of Nvidia, and he's like, haha, Nvidia, they go up and down, right? Like if you follow them over the decades, you see that they're just like this crazy oscilloscope of going up and down, right? So I don't know, but like thinking about other companies, I have observed if you are like riding a wave, waves go up and down, right? And you don't control the waves, you just control not drowning, which is very stressful.
And to your point, like just to say that, it's like I think that's where it's sort of like it's the market, not the management. I think if we said it this way, it's not that the fact that like, and if you just distill it down, if you say computers that are good at matrix multiplication, the need for that feature or that ability goes up and down with market needs, and that's what we're seeing it over time.
And don't get me wrong, I'm not dismissing all the effort, all the genius, all that stuff put into it. But I guess what I'm saying is I have a lot more interest in someone who can figure out how to sustain that over decades, rather than just like a surfer who's just like paddling on their board and then waiting for the big, do they call it a kahuna? I don't know. The big wave to come and like to do it, right? Like, so then second, I know a lot of people, salespeople, field-facing people who are very good at whiteboarding. And a whiteboard is fantastic for one meeting, right? Like it's good for like communicating what's happening. Like we're a visual species, right? Like we like to draw things out. A whiteboard is actually really fast for communicating. But for like Socrates didn't whiteboard. Right? Like if you want to like communicate something that's going to last beyond just a meeting, like what happens after a whiteboard? You look at the junior person and you're like, can you put that in slides?
Yeah.
Right? Like, can you write that up? Right? Like you take a picture of the whiteboard because the whiteboard gets erased, right? And so you have to preserve the whiteboard and some other things. So like whiteboarding to me is like a gimmick. Like it's just a crutch. And this is why, like, now in contrast, as you were saying, like I look at, there's all sorts of stuff over the years we've critiqued about the Amazon, like 6-page memo and the PR FAQ and all that kind of stuff. To summarize, if it's so fucking great, how come they're the only ones who do it? Right. So like, however, like, I think it is better to like write something. Right? To take the time to sit down, to figure out how to organize your thoughts, which has worked for, I'm going to say 5,000 years with humanity, to kind of like write something up and not just have it be something that you can erase and that exists on a wall somewhere. So again, a whiteboard is great for communicating, but what if the idea that whiteboarding is like this essential tool is like something that is part of your religion, it means that you're dismissing all the people who then take that picture of the whiteboard and do something with it, right? Like there's a whole chain of things you don't see that happens after that.
100%. I think that, and also too, it's just sort of like, I just come back to like what I think of like and it's really just another version of the halo effect, which I've mentioned a million times on this podcast. It's just sort of like, it's really the market that's driving these things, right? It's just not fun to talk about. The need for matrix multiplication went up and down like 3 times, right? For video games and gaming cards, for Bitcoin mining and things like that, and now AI, right? That's just kind of boring. What's more fun is what you want to read in a book is like, well, how did they do it? Because like when you're reading a book, you kind of want to take from it like, well, I could do it too, right? And I think the same thing with six-page memos. And I think what all of these things are really doing, they're just taking the preferred communication style of the early founders and the strongest personalities and saying, this is how they prefer to communicate. So it's like everybody knows Jeff Bezos.
That's right.
And, Andy Jassy, Harvard and, Princeton people, right? Generally, if there's one thing I'd say about Ivy League, people I know into Ivy Leagues, they're usually had good SATs. They're usually very quick to like read and process text. That is if you just told me someone went to Ivy League, I'd be like, I bet you they like to process text textually, right? Or process information via text. Makes total sense. So therefore, it's not surprising that they're sort of like, the way that everybody should do it is the way that I like it. Sounds like Jensen. he's from a different background, right? They kind of go over that. He likes to do things visually. A lot of us do, right? To your thing about Cote, or to your thing about, human beings like to do that, right? He likes to do things on a whiteboard. So it makes total sense. But like, it's just all it is sort of stating their preference and then trying to then, if you will, expand it. And I thought to myself, like, what's kind of a ridiculous way to show that? It's like, let's just say for a minute, software-defined talk was, sold for $1 billion. I would love for us to
go
think
on
about that, right? And then what someone could do,
I'm here for this.
right? And what someone could do is be like, well, I'll just pick on myself, but I'll throw you two in. I'll include you two. It's like, you know what? These people love audio. These people love to listen to audio, right? In fact, Brandon listens to X amount of hours of audio a day because audio is the way that you can process and stay up to date and be doing other things. And, you could just make this whole narrative around that, like, consuming information via audio was the reason this podcast was sold for $1 billion, right? And then we could go further and be like, everything at the Software Defined Talk $1 billion corporation, everyone has to submit a 15-minute MP3 podcast episode at the end of the week, and the executives, Matt, Cote, and Brandon, listen to it all. And that's the way that they come up with all of their topic ideas, and they go on, and they're geniuses. And it's like, no, none of that makes any sense, right? It's kind of ridiculous. It's like, it's just saying that, like, and probably people listening is like, I like to process a lot of things via audio, but it doesn't really mean that, like, it's going to be the secret of, like, starting a successful podcast or being worth $1 billion.
Right.
Or like Mr. Beast having, like, all their internal memos are done via video.
Right. That's a great example.
No, it's terrible.
And I think, when I should have said this because I thought about that. That's a great point, man. It's like, if you just take the three things of very successful companies, you could say Amazon 6-page memo, Mr. Beast Incorporated videos of how to do things. And then you would say at Nvidia, it's the whiteboard. And it's like, none of those things cause you to be successful. All of those things were done in very successful markets. And I would just say it's just correlation. It has nothing to do with causation.
I think, you're kicking off a lot of good ideas here, Brandon. And I think that let me just try to whiteboard through it, as it were, right? Like, let me do some Socrates talking here. And I think that what I want from business books, and I think you two would agree, is I don't want to know the tools they use and the practices they follow, but I want to know how they came to use those tools and how those tools sustain how they operate, right? Like, any tool, like, you could use whatever tool you want to do something, but, like, how did you invent that tool? Why are you using that tool? And how is that tool, like, keeping you going? Right?
Why do you think it gives you an advantage?
Yeah, exactly. Right. And then I think the next part is, so how do you essentially take any tool that you may be using, and what does it say about the way you want to operate? Which is to say, the tool you're using is just like a symptom of your culture, right? So you set up this way you want to operate. Like, we all like to communicate with whiteboards. We like to communicate with, like, memos because we went to, like, B school, and that's the way that we communicate. Like, the tools that you use, like, say a lot about how you operate and you think, which is to say, the tool is very important, right? Like, however you think about stuff, you have to do that. But the real analysis, what we need to see in those airport business books is, like, so why do they think this way? What is the way they think? What is the kind of analysis they have? And whatever tool they represented in, whether it's cave paintings, 6-page memos, whiteboards, PowerPoint, whatever, right? Like, and I don't know, maybe that's a little too, like, Marshall McLuhan or whatever, but it does seem like it's worth spending time if you're going to say we use a whiteboard, we do all of our presentations in not presentations, we do all of our thinking in presentations or 6-page memos. You've got to think about how those various mediums, how they kind of, like, belie how you think in a good and a bad way.
I like that. And I think that, if you will, it's almost like at the front of that book, or that however you communicate that, like, hey, this is how we want to work and communicate. But right at the front of that, like the cover page, right, it would be sort of like, before we read all of this, ask yourself one question. Are we in the right market? Right? Before we do everything, are we in the right market? Do we ultimately believe we are in a high growth market? And why do we believe that before we start doing any of the things downstream? Because as soon as you start getting in the downstream and like writing all the memos or doing all the whiteboards, if you haven't like sort of done that pre-work or at least acknowledged that like maybe we don't know, okay, we don't know we're in the right market, but we're going to do this and try, and then we're going to revisit that original question. Or we know we're in a hyper growth market because like people are literally beating down our doors because like we've sold out our chips for the next 3 years, right? It's like, okay, like we know we got that figured out, so now we got to figure out how to work together. So I think that, like, to me, that's like the most important part of it. And I think, you know, to give you like some of the positives of this book, just to kind of wrap this up, was sort of like the things that I liked were just sort of like the stories and the decision points. Like ultimately Nvidia came out of Sun, right? So 2 engineers there were like, we're working on this graphics card, they're kind of ignoring us, we think it's going to be a big deal, right? So they basically, Jensen wasn't even involved, right? They went to Jensen, who was their biz dev guy on the manufacturing side, and they're like, we want you to come work for us, and, you know, or really not work for us, be a founder and run the business for us. And he's like, at first he's like, no, you guys need to figure this out. And then they ultimately do figure it out. And it's like, to me, like that's number one, is like, you know, he was given they came to him with an idea, right? And he was smart enough to be like, I think there's a good idea here. And then 2, the other thing is like, that comes through is like, he did believe, but he was relentless in trying to find the new markets. Like that's the most important thing, right? GPUs, and then GPUs led to sort of the science or the Bitcoin stuff. And then of course that led to AI. Like that to me is sort of the reason why they've been successful. And I think, you know, all this other stuff about whiteboards and things like that. And the final one I thought of you, Cote, was they tell this story, and I think it's meant to be come across one way, but I took it a different way. They tell a story about like, you know, Jensen is basically on vacation, and his staff finds that like he ends up sending more email on vacation than it is when he's in his office. So they kind of stage an intervention, and they're like, man, you need to go on vacation. Like
it's because
stop.
he's not in meetings.
Right. Stop doing this. And so, but he then tells the story.
All
He's
his
like,
time.
right. So he tells the story, and he says something along the lines of like, well, like, you know, I'm in this tropical place, beautiful place, and it's overlooking my kids playing on the ocean or in the pool, and like I've got time, right? And I think to myself, it's like the way that you can work for so many long hours for such a long period of time is it's not work. It's what, you know, it's kind of the 4-hour work week. It's like what you want to be doing. So like,
yes,
you know, I think I think the story is sort of like Jensen's relentless, and that's the way they kind of take it. And I kind of took it more like, no, Jensen wants to be reading these emails and doing this. He doesn't want to be in the pool with the kids, which, I mean, it's not even a judgment. It's just sort of like, you got to be that person, right? I'm saying like, this is how you can work 80 hours a week. It's like, that's what you want to be doing. Whereas a lot of people would be like, I think a lot of parents would have 2 thoughts. Either I want to be in the pool with the kids, or they're going to be like, I don't feel like being in the pool with the kids, but like, this is important to the family. You know what I'm saying? It's like inverting the pyramid. Be like,
right.
It's important I be in the pool with the kids because that's what they think is fun. And even if I don't want to like throw them again, you know, and like play any more of the pool games, it's important to that group, the family, right? And I'm going to put their interests first, right? Whereas everything about Nvidia is about like rolling information up. And you can kind of see this in his life. Like everything is about feeding Jensen. So he's doing what he wants. And I think that's the secret to working these long hours, right? And only a few people are going to have a company and something built around them to let them do it. The most of us are going to have to make some trade-offs. Like I want to be doing the emails. I want to be with the kids, but also I got to be at the kid event, but I don't, and you know, it's like, I'm not really into it, but I'm going to be into it because it's important to the family. You know, I think a lot of us probably struggle with some of those choices where, you know, I don't think Jensen struggles with that, but that's, and again, like, you know, maybe that's what makes him successful, maybe not, but I just sort of like, there is a cost to it, right? I think, again, I think that book tale is sort of like, he works all the time, but to me, it's like, well, like, you know, what does the family want, right? Like, I don't think that it ever comes up. That question never comes up, right? So I thought that was good. But I think, again, like some of those insights, I actually think are really interesting, especially as I'm getting older as a parent, as someone sort of like thinking about these things. Like these kind of stories that are sort of like the inadvertent stories are what make the book kind of more interesting. The whiteboard and the like being kind of, you know, direct, if not mean to people in meetings. I'm like, I've seen it. I've lived it. I'm like, I'm not doing that anymore. Like, I'm out of that. Like, I'm like, I'm just checked out of that. But like, I get it. If other people think it's a good way to work, I leave them to it. So like, you should. One thing I would say, the final thing is like, if you ever want to work at Nvidia, just like the Amazon book, you should read this book first. I think it's pretty clear about like, I think they make it very clear about how it is there. So you can read this and kind of decide for yourself if you want to be there. So just some thoughts.
I like what you're saying there, Brandon. There's two things. One, I think that it's underappreciated that a lot of the early strategy work in like the 60s and 70s was based on finding your market, or as we might say nowadays, finding your market window, right? Like defining with the competitive advantage, the products that you have, the way of producing it, the price that you can put it out in the market, the suppliers that you're dealing with, et cetera, and so forth. How can you identify metaphorically and literally where to show up? Like what market do you go to where you can maximize your profit? And I think that's something that a long-lived technology company has to be good at, is that maybe this past 5 years was shit, right? But the next 15 years will be great because we know how to identify like how to enter a market and do things, right? And, that drives a lot of M&A and strategy and things like that. But then the second thing, which I think is more important, which is interesting, because I haven't thought about it this way, is that maybe when we talk about the 10x developer or the 10x executive or the 10x whatever, all these people where everyone's like, oh, if only we had more on, right? Like there's only like 20 people in the world who can do this. Maybe what they're saying is it turns out that everyone has the skills to do the job, but there's only a few people who won't go swim in the pool with their kids on their vacation, right? And so what you're looking for are those individuals who, and I only, let's say 40% mean this as a put down and 60% as a, whatever the opposite of a put down is, a beautification. I don't know my words here, but like you're trying to find the people who are dedicated to their work. Now, let's go into a completely different field. If you were to go into the field of like fine art, right? And you would be like, oh, Picasso, maybe not the best father, but look at that fucking painting, right? like all the sort of like spouses that various artists go through, the pain that they put their kids through. But you look at the art that they create, and that's kind of, unless you're like really dig deep and read all the books, that's all that you pay attention to, right? And they're a similar thing where like, if you read the lives of artists, they're kind of like, I got to go do my shit. Can you shut the fuck up? Right? Like, and like, I'm going to get a spouse, usually because of the way things have happened over the eons, a wife and a series of wives who are going to like take on the work of your domestic life, your entire life. So you can just go to the studio and like, throw a bucket of paint on a canvas or whatever you're going to do. Right. And so like, it's a very similar sort of thing where like, we do appreciate genius and dedication, but it comes at this huge price of just like, that's all that you do. And so maybe it's just like, yeah, sure, Picasso's like a 10x developer, but whew, did you see his personal life?
Right, but
like,
it comes
he
with
gave up
things,
a lot.
yeah.
Right.
And I do think to be just slightly more, it's maybe it doesn't have to be so unique, but I think an easy like test for yourself is just sort of like for anyone, it's sort of like when you're on the weekend and you have downtime, you can do anything you want. Like, what do you do? And if the thing that you end up doing, if you can somehow align that to something that makes money, great. If you can somehow align that to something that makes extraordinary money, even better. You're going to have no problem. You know what I mean? Like this is the whole thing, the writer, right? This is J.K. Rowling or any other, Stephen King. It's like, they love to write. They're going to write no matter what. Like, it was going to happen no matter what. And that's what they want to do. Like, no one's making them do it. And I always think like, I was thinking of this example. I was thinking of Matt Ray. It's like, what if taking Raspberry Pis and building Kubernetes clusters and like taking and if you will, revitalizing old Mac computers. What if that led to like $1 billion industry? Like Matt Ray would be, but we'd be like, Matt Ray worked all the time. Matt Ray, Matt's always kind of doing it, right?
I think what this has got me thinking of is like, of all the people who are they're grinding on the weekends and like, because they bought into this mythos that, like, that's the only way, I'm going to be a billionaire too. And it's like, this is survivor bias. This is, this is
Right,
all the
right, right.
people who are like, oh, if I just, ignore my family, like Jensen Huang, I'll be a billionaire too. It's like, no, you'll just be a bad dad.
Right.
Right.
Well, I mean, that's the whole, I was gonna say that's the combination. You have to kind of somehow discover a combination of like stuff, because I don't think anyone can work 80 hours for like 30 plus years. It's like, you kind of have to figure out, like, I love doing this stuff. I'm in the right market, right? The stuff that I love to do aligns with the right market. And then of course timing comes into it. And it's like, you're right, man. I think we're all worked at some startups and things like that, where it's like, because whenever you're at a startup, like, the founder always believes they're this kind of person, because they're working a lot. They're putting a lot into it, and they're just like, they're frustrated. Not everyone's working as much as them, right? And they're like, frustrated.
The old Jeffrey Katzenberg quote: "If you don't show up on Saturday, don't bother coming in on Sunday."
Right, and it's that whole thing, and it's like, because they're all, but we've all been there, but we've all been at these companies where it's like, it didn't work out. Like, in fact, all we all did was like waste a lot of time in retrospect, right? I mean, everybody listening to this, I bet you, if you worked at a small company or a startup, like, you have that experience. Like, a few of them going to succeed, but you're like, man, remember all that? Like you and I, us three on this podcast do 3 hours of stories about, like, look at all the time we wasted doing this. Look at all the time we wasted doing this. That just led to nothing, right?
Yeah.
So I just think it's just interesting to kind of think all of that through. And then and of course it's really interesting in real time, because this will be a good time capsule for us. It's like, okay, well, like, DeepSeek
In real
is a
time,
great.
it's like, think of all the money we spent on that AI foundation company that came in 7th.
Yeah, exactly right. So, like, DeepSeek, this is going to be a great moment, and I think this is like, this is why, like, it's like real time, if you will, evaluation of the Nvidia way. It's like, okay, if it's management, then they're figuring it out. They've worked all weekend, or they've been working whatever since the announcement came out. They're going to come out with a reason that it's not right, or they're going to come out with a chip. It actually turns out exactly right. The next chip does this even better. It does the DeepSeek method even better, and you got to have it, right? Or going forward, we would be like, it's just a moment when Nvidia, just like Cisco, it flirted with, like, maybe the world's biggest, most valuable company, but then things change, and and again, we come back to what episode number? Episode 504. It's software defined talk. We can be like, at least we discussed it in real time.
Yeah, I think this reinforces my theory of capitalism, which is that if you imagine a gigantic, like, clear plastic tube above your heads, right? And there is just like a big wind tunnel, and there's euros, dollars, whatever currency you want, just blowing through it constantly, right? Like, your job in capitalism is to figure out two things. One, how do I get a hole in that tube so I can reach my hand up into it and grab as many bills as possible before someone stops me and pull them down? Two, not destroy the whole machine, because I might be able to drill a hole in it and put my hand up there again, right? And that kind of is like the metaphor I always think about, just kind of like from The Price is Right. You're going to go down in the money chamber and grab the money, but you got to sustain it too. And so you can have whatever kind of theories that you want. You can work on the weekends. You can show up on Sunday because you believe in it. But really, you're just sticking your money in the tube. Now, speaking of things that you stick your hand into, Brandon, when people are looking around and they're like, I don't know what's happening to me, but I feel like there's some force that's compelling me to put my hand somewhere, and where they're putting their hand is bureaucracy. What's shooting through that tube this episode?
Well, what I hope is shooting through that tube is they've sent an email with their postal address to stickers@softwaredefinedtalk.com, and I'm going to send you a sticker, as many as you want, anywhere in the world. And of course, when we write the business book of the success of Software Defined Talk, we're going to talk about how stickers were our promotional strategy and how it was genius, right? That's how it's all going to work. Also, I want to invite everyone, as we do every week, to join the Slack. This week, I spawned a great little conversation, because it was helpful for me, about what terminal people are actually using, mostly on Mac. Because there was an article, and I read about it, and I was doing some stuff, and it turns out lots have changed in terminals since I've been around there. And I guess Warp was really popular. This other one called, I think it's called Ghosty with 2 T's. That was pretty popular. And then, of course, a lot of people, as only the Software Defined Talk listeners can do, be like, no. You know what's fine? The default. Just the terminal app. Terminal app is fine.
Terminal app has gotten pretty fine.
Default lifestyle
it's
in
fine.
effect again.
You don't need all that stuff.
Is iTerm 2 still the default lifestyle, or is it really just like don't even?
iTerm 2 was in there a lot, but a lot of people had moved off it, and a lot of people
and went back
inertia.
to terminal.
A lot of people were just like inertia.
So terminal, and there was something that kept me from going full default, but yeah.
Yeah. So the whole point. So if you want to get in on this kind of riveting discussion and many other things, you should join the Software Defined Talk Slack, and you can do that by going to softwaredefinedtalk.com and click on the Slack link.
Now, let me give a little rat hole here. I had reason to use the terminal, and as everyone knows, long-term listeners, I'm very into the defaults lifestyle, so I just use whatever terminal the .app is. I don't even know what it is. I think at some point I changed it to load up Bash for me. And so I had to go to, I think, ChatGPT, because I wanted to set up where my Java class path was. And I asked it, should I put this in my Bash RC or Bash _ profile? And it gave me some fucking bullshit answer about like something about terminals and opening up. And so I want to throw this out to whoever's in charge of this stuff. The people who have separated out these two files, they need to study up on what the defaults lifestyle is, because the defaults lifestyle does not include two different files that do the same fucking thing, and then one file by convention just calls the other file. And I feel like maybe there was some reason, but at this point, what do we fucking do with our time?
You know the reason, Cote. One's an interactive shell and one isn't.
Coach, I just want to say, I want to give you the solution to this problem, because the defaults lifestyle to this question in ChatGPT is the following. The prompt is something like, create a Docker file that has Java version XYZ in it and includes all of the things that I need to run it using, in your case, Bash, using the Bash shell.
Yeah.
Enter, game over. Then you just like, you take that. And then if you're me, you'd be like, can you write the Docker Compose file for that? And then they do that. And then you can be like, what was the command? It's like, can you give me the Docker Compose can to start this? And then that's it. That's all you got to know. And then you're done. And it works 100% of the time.
I agree,
my friend.
I agree. And that is just another reckoning for whoever's in charge of Bash. I'm sure there's like 0.3 people who now like maintain Bash, but just like sort it out. Figure out what's going on there. Now, speaking of things you can sort out, there's a lot of conferences. There's Configuration Management Camp in Ghent. That's in Belgium, if you don't know where that is. That's next week. I'm going to be speaking there February 2nd to 5th. There's also Cloud Navigate North America in San Francisco. That's in February 10th to 11th. We've got DevOps Days LA and Scale 22X, which sadly I'm not going to. I just found out I'm going to be speaking at the VMware user group, the VMUG in the Netherlands, March 12th. There's SRE Day in London. There's also Monkey Gross, which is going to be in London, same time. And Cloud Foundry Day is going to be in the US at Palo Alto, hosted by us at VMware Broadcom. Also, NDC Oslo, it's May 21st to 23rd. And there is KubeCon EU. And then also a late show up here is DevOps Day Chicago. It's going to be March 18th, coming up soon. I've been to that conference several times. It's very nice. That time of year, I think you can go to Chicago and you see this kind of like emerald sapphire thing on the rivers that run through it, or canals. I don't know what they call it in Chicago, but it's a nice place to go. So that said, Brandon, what's your recommendation this week?
My recommendation is I've started watching this new show on Hulu, Paradise. So I've only seen a couple episodes, but I think so far I like it. I think it's pretty good. So if you're watching, want something to watch, I think it's better to kind of go in blind. I'm not going to say much about it. It kind of has a little mystery component to it. So watch the first episode, if you will, see if you like it. I think you'll know right away. So like I said, 2 episodes in, pretty strong start. You know, of course, you never know with these, but if you want something to watch, Paradise on Hulu is a good one.
Yourself, Matt Ray?
My recommendation is I want someone to recommend things to me. I'm reaching out to our community. I've been thinking I wanted to get into automated drones. Like I don't want to like, get the little camera and steer it myself. I want to program them. And so I've been looking into like PX4 and ArduPilot, and I'm looking for a dev kit that isn't going to break my bank. And so I've kind of narrowed it down to like a couple of things, the Holybro X500 V2 or the QAV 250. And I just want somebody to tell me like, yeah, I've used that, it's fine. Or no, this is what you should be using instead. And the kicker on this is like, it's ridiculously expensive to ship to Australia for some reason. So I probably won't buy till I visit the US.
Well, hopefully we get some feedback on that. That's almost one of the most Matt Ray recommendations I've ever heard. Is I need some kind of kit for a bunch of like letters strung together with numbers that make no sense. But,
thank you. Please recommend them to me.
Well, I have two recommendations. One is I would call it advice, and one is a recommendation. The first piece of advice is my son is at the grade level where citations actually affect your grade. And I remember when I was discovering the, let's say, the joy of citations, and they are so annoying. The way that you format your citations, the work, the author, the date, the source, but they're pretty easy to figure out, and they are very important. So I don't really know who I'm giving this recommendation to, but just put up with it. Just citations, just learn some MLA citation, you'll be fine. Like, I remember going through this, you just have to burn it into your brain, and it'll last. It's nice. It also helps you in your corporate life. Anytime that you have a well-done citation, people kind of don't question it if you formatted it correctly. My other recommendation is I was looking through some old D&D stuff. There is a book, the Candlekeep Mysteries, that has all these sorts of adventures in it in the Forgotten Realms. And there's the first adventure in there is called The Joy of Extra-Dimensional Spaces. And I was reading through it again, and it is a very good adventure for like first level characters. It's very imaginative. It has a lot of interesting things going on. It's not your typical like, let's just go into some caves and kill some goblins. It's very well thought out. And so it's a good representation of like what a good role-playing game adventure can be. So check that out if you're tired of just like black pudding and things like that. So, speaking of, I'm sure you are tired of gelatinous cubes, black pudding, maybe even those weird monsters that come down and suck your blood out. I forget what they're called, sturges maybe. But I'm sure you've enjoyed this episode of Software Defined Talk, which is episode 504. I'm not sure what pair of Levi's that is, but I think I might own a pair. So if you want to like read the Slack channel that we've talked about, see the show notes, all those conferences that I just very quickly ran through, a bunch of stuff that we didn't talk about, you can go to softwaredefinedtalk.com/504. You can find those links and other stuff like that. And with that, we'll see everyone next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, good job as always. Coach, I did have a quick question for you on your recommendation. Not so much on your recommendation. I just wanted to get your thought on footnotes. I feel like I want there to be no more footnotes in newsletters, but I feel like you read a newsletter. I love
footnotes.
You're a footnote person. I know. I feel like newsletter writers have broadly embraced footnotes, but why? Like why? Like I just why do I need the footnote?
Now, I know Matt Ray has to leave in less than 7 minutes. So I may not be able to answer this question for him, but I can answer it for you. I think there are many reasons to have a footnote. One is a citation. We're going to throw that out because that's meaningless to your question, right? Like if you use a footnote for a citation, don't do that. That's a waste of time, right? Like the next reason to use a footnote is you would like, there's an even, like if you've ever read the Martin Gardner annotated Alice in Wonderland, right? You use a footnote. If you ever read any annotated stuff, use a footnote the way we would use a hyperlink to say you're reading the original text and now there's some commentary. Follow the footnote and you can read the commentary. Now, I think that's a valid use of footnotes. And the thing with that kind of footnoting is you put those footnotes not at the foot of the page, but the foot of the book. And so going in that when you're reading about Alice goes down the tunnel, here's the drink, here's this, that, and the other, if I follow the footnote, I'm doing it intentionally. It's bringing me out of like reading the book because that's what I'm signed up for, right? Now, the next type of footnote is, I think what you see in newsletters is it's called the I don't have an editor footnote. And this is what I suffer from, right? Is like I've written something or I have more thoughts and I just cannot bear to not share it. Right.
Oh,
like,
okay.
And so like in general, probably with stuff that I write and with what you see in newsletters, this is stuff that if it was like in the New York Times or wherever else, they would have just fucking deleted, right? But the person writing it is like, I really want to tell you this, right? Like this is something that either I want to tell you or I enjoy typing, right? Like this is something about like writing that maybe not all readers appreciate, is that writing stuff is just like a pleasurable experience, and then sharing it with people, publishing it, is like compounding pleasurable, right? So you might, I mean, it's kind of like a footnote is what happens in a podcast where we just go on, or maybe I shouldn't say we go on these like things that are totally unrelated.
Right, a tangent.
Right, it's a tangent. And so a
Sure.
footnote can be a tangent. And there can be, and this almost gets into the last thing, there's a certain indulgence and getting closer to the next point, a certain understanding of your audience where they want footnotes, right? The footnotes is not only an indulgence of the author, but it is, indulgence is the wrong word. It is something that the
audience
wants.
expects. If people are signed up for the newsletter, they probably expected that.
Well, no, I
Right.
agree. I think I'm thinking of
Unsubscribers, it's not your jam.
the people that I see, like Matt Levine is a huge footnote guy, but I think he falls into your category of like loves to write, doesn't really want to leave anything on the cutting room floor, right? I think Ben Thompson, same thing. Ben Thompson like quotes himself, footnotes himself. I mean, I think he does things that are linguistically just not allowed. Like he shouldn't be able to do it. But again, he doesn't have an editor. No one's going to tell him no.
Exactly,
I really like. I love his podcast, so I'm not criticizing it. I get it. So I don't know. And I guess maybe the answer to this question is like I don't read the footnotes. So you know.
And then I think the fourth thing. Now I am not a big David Foster Wallace fan, right? But he established a footnoting forum, which was literally footnotes to footnotes, right? And once you start having footnotes to your footnotes, what you're doing there is either extremely indulgent and decadent, or as he does it, it is part of what you're reading. It's like part of the art of what you're doing, is that it's even hard to express, but you appreciate as someone reading it, as someone observing the art, and of course creating it, which I've covered in point 3 about footnotes, is that the footnote is part of the whole thing, right? Like it's expected that you're not only going to have a footnote, but you're hungering for the writer and the reader. You're like, I just read this footnote and I feel like there might be more on this one sentence. And you delve into that footnote. Now, you could also, footnotes aren't used like this, but I just watch, maybe we should have a spoiler alert here. But I watched the last episode of the current series of Silo, where they have this, like, all of a sudden you're in DC and there's these people doing things. And that is kind of a footnote, right? It's sort of like it's this weird, like a flashback is just a footnote that is in the main text, right? Like,
really
and so you've got to think
Uh-huh.
about like a footnote is sort of like, this doesn't fit in the flow of things, but it's important for the narrative, right? And kind of like in that episode, like you're all of a sudden you're watching it, and then all of a sudden it's like here are these two people in DC, and you're like, what the fuck is happening?
Well, that's probably a good example, because I mean, having read the books, it's sort of like setting up all of season 3. It's like, to your point, like, it's sort of like, oh, it's a new world, which a footnote can open up, right? A footnote can be like, oh, turns out there's a whole nother set of books here I can read, you know, and it's a whole, and explains all the history. Right. So I get that.
And that would be, I'm sure there's some, what's his name? The guy, is it Umberto Eco? And then there's also the Polish guy who does these kind of books. Like there probably is at least one, if not many books that continue on from a footnote, right? That would be the ultimate kind of like literary artistry footnote thing, is like in this category 4, is like there was a 1 to 3 sentence footnote in a book, and now here's a 500 page book based on that footnote.
I like that though. I like when people like what was Ravaz, and in this case, I actually mean it, the Wiz, right? Like someone picking up the story and like writing the backstories for stuff. Like that's a cool literary device. So, well, I guess we'll leave it this way. You know, no footnote needed here. We'll just tell people it's like just listen to the episode, you get everything you need. But if you didn't, I guess we do have the show notes, which I guess in some way are footnotes to the podcast. So there you have it.
Well done.
All right. Well, normally I would thank the people that watched us while we're streaming, but for some reason I'm not allowed to log into the chat, so I haven't really been able to see what's going on. So I'll just thank you for watching on the video. And if you did live stream with us today, that was even better. But if you watch later, that's really good too. And with that, we will talk to you next time.
Bye.